because we spoke about science and technology.
Yes, and how it...
The impact it has
On
co-creation.
Oh yeah, on co-creation.
Yes.
Closer to my mouth? Okay, it sounds like it's resonating, but it's not. Okay. It has impact on co-creation because I think to start with we need all kinds of knowledge and insights from technology and technicians, engineers, people who know how to work with algorithms and everything. So there's a co-creation from the very start. For myself, I use internet or whatever I do in a very instrumental way. I do not know how it works, and I know that I actually should, but I don't. And I think there is a world out there which can only be there through co-creation. And what I think is absolutely vital is to have the creativity in it. And not become just the slaves of algorithms, but to see how we can maybe manipulate or be creative, let's put it in a more positive way, be creative when we think in terms of developing technology or technicities in the sense of the digital. So input, a lot of input from the creative people, artists, from whatever color. And I mean not literally, but the whole range from writers up to singers to performers, etc.
Thank you. And then I will go to the general question I asked. Have you thought about it? Who wants to start? Or should I repeat the question again? Okay.
So the question was, what about decolonization? Is it needed, yes or no? In a sense, I think it's very much needed. In the sense that you have to be proud of the human capacity to think critically. Critically on their own past, critically about their present situation, and creative at the same time to think about developments for the future. I think the term in itself, decolonization, is very much too much skewered to one topic in history that might be ongoing or might not be ongoing, and it's very, very much in my interpretation of it a Western kind of term. So it denies, in a sense, an agency that you, on the contrary, want everyone to have. So I think what is badly needed is that people are given a voice, all people are given a voice, without losing the tenacity of intellectuals and the acumen you will have to develop and to be concentrated on doing research, which in my sense is what academia is about. That was one answer I had in mind. But I have an entirely different answer. And in that sense, it's also very personal, in the sense that you have to be honest to yourself. We heard a song earlier on about the naked truth. So what does that mean? Is that you, without self-interest, without thinking of what your interest is in the world, be honest to yourself, be truth to yourself in what you do. Then comes in, and that's the question I think we are here about, in what can creativity add to it. And I think you have different layers of knowledge. So you have one layer of knowledge that is discursive, that's analytical, that needs a lot of attention, a lot of concentration by researchers. But there's also a different kind of knowledge that speaks to the heart. And that adds very much. It may be music, as we had heard performing. It speaks to a different level of human existence. But also I want you to show you a book, and we can pass it around. It's a picture book. I may not use that term. It's an illustrated work, and it is about atrocities that were committed by Dutch military in Indonesia. It's about Rabagede, and more than 400 men were killed at that moment without any need. So there have been I pass around a few copies of it. And there you can see what pictures, what photographs add to a discursive kind of depiction of what has happened there. So it speaks on a different level of existence. But what is needed for doing that, that is also an authenticity that you need. But you have to go, you have to be empathetic. You have to really listen to what other people are saying. And that is a faculty that is rare. And it becomes rarer. So I'm quite pessimistic, to be honest, as a publisher, that the naked truth is more and more just to be found in little pockets of society. So the mainstream media mostly is about how many points you get, how many listeners you get, how many money can come in. So I think what is important for academia is that you have a kind of free space to speak your mind, to do research without interest. And it's a very old tradition. It's not only a Western tradition. It's a tradition in many cultures, in many strands of history. So it's a fallacy to think that you need decolonization. That's not true. In every major tradition, there is this tradition of honesty to yourself and trying to find the truth. So you don't need the term decolonization. In my sense, it's nonsense. It might refer to a certain period in time, but it's not what it's about. It's about intellectual honesty. It's also about courage. So you have to have courage to be able to do that.
Can I just okay, very interesting. Talking about the naked truth and talking about being honest to yourself and talking about that. Because what I want to talk about right now is the whole fact that we have libraries which are 200, 300 years old with books, you know, which depicted that period of time, which is not the truth of today. So if we want to bring that knowledge from that library to the now, digitalize them and make them accessible, are we talking about truth?
Well, what is needed basically is that you also forget in this term that you have a South-South dialogue. So it's not anymore the case that everything has to go through some kind of European or North American center. And that's very good, I think. So what you see is that you have to develop many centers, but the position of scholars in the different cultures in different countries is very different, and also of artists. So, for example, in the Netherlands, to speak of the village, the neighborhood I know a little, is that there is a very uneven power structure in Dutch society about who gets what. It's decided partly by politics, partly by entrepreneurial interests. So, and less money is allocated to what is really needed in society, and it's very worrying in my perspective. Also, if you go on a very granular level on deciding as a publisher who gets published, it's in itself it's a good tradition, but if you see where the money flows. Publishers are always, they have a kind of, they are always a bit double-hearted. They need money, and at the same time they want to be honest. That's a difficult kind of balancing act. So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, please, let me just, but if I say we are going to listen to you, I think we'll sit down here the whole evening because it's very interesting what you're saying. And I'm getting triggered. Really, I'm hearing you speak. I say, wow, I need to go in again, but I need to hold on. But I want to know your version about it, because I have a question for you. Value of bridging humanities to the field of digital humanities. I hear him speaking, and I think you have a point on that. Can you first react on him before you go on your...
Yeah. I think I take the point, but I also think I disagree a little bit, because I do think that decolonization of knowledge structures is really a critical thing that we need to be thinking about, because when the digital humanities becomes a tool that's accessible to a lot of people, that's great. When we see more and more open access archives being created, where people in rural areas can access them and read them, that's also really great. But what ends up happening in many cases is we see the same old power structures getting reinforced. So I'm from the US, I was trained there, and there's a lot of discussion happening there by people like Rupita Rassam at Salem State University and people like Alex Gill, who study essentially communities in the global south from a North American perspective. But a lot of the points that they make are we have to really pay attention to how these archives are being generated, who is choosing what is digitized. Because often it's what is in the library at Leiden, what is in the library at Harvard or Yale. That's great, but it becomes a reflection of our old archive. So we have to start thinking about how other things get added to that. And I think that that's what a lot of people are talking about when we say, how do we give access to these tools to scholars from communities that aren't traditionally at the top of the power structure? And how do we make sure that their concerns are well reflected in the materials that can be studied? So this is, I think, it's great because DH opens these possibilities. It's just something that we need to be conscientious of. And the nice thing about something like Bridging the Humanities is it's an open access journal, which means that people can see it, people can engage with it. And I think Miriam made a really good point earlier talking about, so to encourage scholars, people like me who are early in their career who need to publish to maintain their careers, to encourage them to publish in a venue like this, you kind of have to affiliate yourself with somebody like Brill, where you can see, okay, what I'm doing here is going to continue to feed into my career, but at the same time, it provides this non-linear experience that lets people experiment in ways that were very, very difficult to do in the past, whereas many online open access journals still kind of just regurgitate the old journal aesthetic. And the nice thing about Bridging Humanities is it can really add flexibility. It doesn't have to be a linear experience, and you can bring in outside media and really kind of change the way the conversation is happening.
Wow. Let me go to Geesje van Haren. And you're working with young journalists, let me see. And I'm wondering how you can react to Paul when it comes to this open source and how these young journalists can use that platform without being ruled by the big fish, you know? So how did that happen?
We don't invite the big fish. We play our own games, and we do that well. And we are very deep into the materials that we investigate. We are in investigative journalism, searching for the main topics that are going around on the world. We don't do that with the traditional media. We just don't. So we don't play by their rules. And we have done this for 13 years. When I say that, I feel old. 13 years now, and slowly the big fish would like to play with us. So that's great. We are now in a project that is called Lost in Europe, where we are searching for 10,000 refugee children that got lost within Europe. And the BBC is on board, and Argos is on board, the Dutch radio station, and a lot of cross-border cooperation is happening. But we started it, and that is how.
You can react on both of them. Can you react? You want to react? Not now. Okay. You would like to react on Paul?
Yes, I would. Sorry. What you added to decolonization of knowledge is decolonizing knowledge structures. And I think that's very crucial. It's about the knowledge, who produced it, who made it operational, but also what kind of structures are behind that or deeper into that. And I think if some place needs to be decolonized, it's the structures. And it's also understanding that we're all part of it. And I was also thinking of, in terms of what Geesje just said, I use traditional media because language is still, and written language is still what we are supposed to do, but you can also change the content of the discourse and write differently and not follow the old set rules, and so make different narratives and narratives that interweave with other media. And I have been working with artists a lot and see how we could actually get into a sort of equal footing on each contribution to a certain topic from our own perspectives. And that is, and just to give you one example, I worked for a few years with an artist from China, also living in the Netherlands. And in the end, when we were doing an exhibition and presentations and also together performances, we also wanted to grasp, again in language or in written language, what the differences were. And then he said, and I think it's very nice, is that he was going more for what we could call poetics, and I was doing more the essay. Because they're just two different modes, but you can deal with the same topic. And he came with ideas that I would never have even thought of, in terms of, for instance, globalization and global art market and global traffic, global goods traveling around the world, is to actually show quantity, show it. And then thousands of kilos of stuff that needs to be transported, that needs the whole logistics, etc., to actually make it tangible. And it says more than any, discourse can do, but together also it strengthens. So we still can use the old media as well, and I don't think the written language will ever be redundant, because it's where we meet. It's just like today, which is so obvious. We all use English as if it's the common language. Of course it isn't. Speaking in terms of colonizing, but where do we start to take the other languages not just into the equation, because we should, but how do we have access to it? And we all think when we speak English, everybody knows, but that's not true.
Wow. This is a great topic because you make me think about like French, for example. I had difficulty also making the translation, and you saw that. And we also have lots of French works that have been lost or not recognized because it's whole language then. We all focus on English, so we are losing a lot of content from the French-speaking countries. And many others. Yeah. So how can we deal with that in this whole? Yep.
That is I really I'm glad that you are talking about this, and I'm really excited and inspired by all of your comments. The inspiration that we get is for our project is also by not looking to innovations that come from America or come from the UK, sorry. We look the other way because in journalism and most communication channels are mobile first. And the first countries that got mobile first and that grew up with people of my generation that grew up with mobile first, they invented the most innovations in countries in Africa, in Asia, and in the south of America. That is why we, in March, we created and organized an event like this, and we asked all the innovators and experts with 10 years and more experience to come to Amsterdam and tell us what can we learn from you, just to turn it around. Because most of the people in the media are looking at, oh, what are we going to do with Google, or what are we going to Facebook? But there are such interesting inventions in Africa and in other countries of the world. So yeah, maybe it's for science interesting as well.
It's for science interesting, but also for the big fish. But these are the problems when you come to Kenya, for example. I went to visit the Maasai, and I saw that they all have mobile phones, and they use mobile phones to pay the M-Pesa, And I was asking myself, why is that possible in Kenya? Why we don't have it in Holland? Because they took away the bank, they bypassed the bank, and they're using their own mobile phones and to have, to do transaction. But it's not possible in Holland because we still have the big fish who still control the economy. So yeah, so open access. I think Peter you are the most, when it comes to open access, you are the best guy. Because that's your topic. I Googled you and I saw that you really like talking about that. Okay.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's a kind of double-edged subject matter as well. Why? Because everyone wants to have access to knowledge. So what could be better than to have open access? No. What I see from a publisher's perspective is that there are a lot of initiatives financed by government of various sorts, or funding agencies, or what have you. And then after the period that it has been funded, it dies down. It vanishes in thin air. They pull the plug. It's somewhere sitting in some kind of server at an institute nobody knows about. It's in open access. You can access it for free, but it's not accessible. And what I see, so this kind of contradiction that is not acknowledged by the open access community at large, I would say. So what you need is a kind of viability for those kind of initiatives, like the initiatives we convene today. So what is very interesting is that you try to combine different strands of traditions and combine them together. Also to make it in a multimedia context. The difficulty is, I think, to make it a continuous effort. That it's not only for the period that the subsidy lasts, but that you have some paid-for model behind it. And not just talk the talk, but do it in a way that's also for publishers and also for researchers, but also for artists. Where is here the interest for the artists in this initiative? So most scholars that are attracted to this initiative, they are on a payroll by university. Artists are not. You are not. The musicians tonight are not. So they have an ad hoc kind of activity. They may be paid for or not paid for, get a few €100, and they go their own way. What happens then? So is it sustainable? So a publisher typically takes a longer view on things, and he wants to create some publishing activities that will last a few generations, and not only as the length of the subsidy in years. And that is a problem that has to be addressed initially, from the start. Otherwise it's nonsense to do. So that's my advice. If you have any initiative that has no business sense inside, don't start. Because you disappoint a lot of people. A lot of people get into it. We have a few examples. For example, at Amsterdam University Press, we had the Journal of Archaeology of the Low Countries. A beautifully made multimedia with access to big data, with pictures, with the whole shebang. What happened? There were a few new appointees, professors of archaeology in Groningen and in Leiden, and they, we don't like, we can put the €10,000 a year we pay for it. We have other priorities now. So, I'm sorry. Just drop it.
Give it to her because she's shaking her head. She said, no, I'm not. I don't agree with you.
You're killing, artistics, and you are killing. But not everything has to have a business model at first. And you have to have the experiment, because we are here because some pioneers got the guts to experiment with new forms, and that is fantastic. But if it dies because of money, it doesn't mean it wasn't worth anything. It was. You have to love the baby steps. I'm sorry, I'm getting angry at you. The baby steps that you, your small victories because other people after you can learn from you have to experiment and dare to fail.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because then it reminds me of Rembrandt. I think he got rich when he was dead, right?
No, that's not historically not accurate. He was a very rich man, Rembrandt, at many stages. He had some dealings with. He couldn't handle money, so that's another point. So he earned a lot of money.
But there are a lot of writers who only.
No, I'm not saying it's not worthwhile to have an initiative like it. I'm saying that what is needed, that you have to take a long-term view. If there is no sustainability in this initiative,
And who determines that?
determines the community you are embedded in. So the people you do it for, that have to have an interest in it. So you have to get commitment. You can do that, and I agree with you, I think. What I agree in is that you have to give it a chance. But if you don't get this commitment by the stakeholders, meaning the scholars, meaning the artists, meaning the people who want to read, who want to experience, if it falls flat in all those senses, and people are not prepared for it, institutions are not prepared for it. And it's true, big institutions in the Netherlands, big institutions in Europe, big institutions worldwide, they are not prepared to do it. There is not much money to be found in humanities and social sciences. So that's one of the challenges many publishers, many scholars, many people who are involved in this kind of questions have to address. And to sidestep that issue and say, oh, but you're killing this, and it is not at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you have to be upfront and very conscious of what you're doing and where you put all this energy in. What you want to eat, you want to drink, you want to have a future for what you are doing. If it's lost after 2 years, what do? Say, oh, sorry, nice experiment. No.
Okay. Kitty, can co-creation be solutions? Can it be a solution for that? Because in co-creation, you work with like-minded people who have all these ideas that what you're able to produce is going to work out. So if at the end of the day, there's no money coming in, well, you gave your best, right?
I think this is a huge problem, and two different things. The one is about content and who you want to address and who wants to participate in it. So it only gets filled when people participate and co-create and feel addressed. But there's also an audience, hopefully only a growing one, that finds interesting things and will be using the gadget or the open access into this world. If co-creation will solve a problem per se, I don't think so, but I think co-creation is always needed because there's no sole restricted source of knowledge. It's only there when it's shared and when it's indeed seen as more inclusive than we do today. And then I mean with research, it's not restricted to academia at all. Research is what so very many people do, to start with artists. Maybe different formats, but they do research. And what we share is precisely this curiosity. And in that also learning from each other. And no hierarchies as far as it's possible. So no hierarchies in my knowledge is better or more worth than yours. Because it might be just different. And in that case, I think we should indeed open up to many more forms of knowledge production. I heard already a few, but one is also what is there from emotion, intuition, tacit knowledge, knowledge that you know only when you know your materials, when you know your instrument. Every artist, every performing artist immediately understands and immediately knows that if you do not have it entirely in your fingers and know an instrument and an instrument knows you, you're ending nowhere. This is a sort of accumulative knowledge production where co-creation is needed. If that will solve open access, I think it will make open access incredibly much more interesting. And maybe precisely a place, a Fundgrube, where you can go and find all kind of things that you would never find otherwise, because there is this heuristics of going from one to the other without actually knowing how the jumps go. And I think in that respect, if it's challenging, it will be used, and then it's worth having it. And it might also be more sustainable. The more people there, the more different people there, the more it will endure.